David has said here is that we are asking questions. This is not for comments from the audience. This is for questions. And you're allowed to make two-sentence questions. If it goes beyond that, you're out of the game. And the presenters are expected to be able to answer the question in two well-formulated sentences. And if you do all that, David will lead us in a huzzah or two. And this is David Reuwer, if you don't know him.
Where's Leon?
Would the presenters get up and say, yeah, Leon, where's
Leon?
All right. A couple of commercials first. First is on John Beek's Baron de Kalb book. If anyone will make a contribution of $30 to the Murals Trail, you can then take a book and you rip open the plastic and make sure he signs it for you. So I'll be back there and throughout lunch, helping him do that. So again, this is a tremendous work that John Beeks has done on Baron de Kalb, who led what side?
Oh, I think it's
The Marylanders! Okay. And so this is the opportunity to get it at a rate you'll never get it again. The second commercial I want to make is we just saw an absolutely clear, comprehensive, and competent presentation by Rick Wise, who self-proclaimed is a newbie. He's only been in this 2.5 years. And the point that we would like to make on behalf of the Swamp Fox Trail and the Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution is, Charles and I have been studying the Bridges Campaign for 15 years, but it's never been so eruditely presented as Rick, you did today. And give him a hit, man! None of that 21st century stuff. 18th century is what our hosts have been saying. So it's a hip hip. Now, what the point of that is, besides praising Rick's great job, each one of us needs to be picking something and filling in the gap and doing that, whether it's academically or in the field or with presenting to other people, especially our children and grandchildren. All right, and then
Financially.
or financially, absolutely. The third commercial is, can everybody hear me? George asked me to explain the three main things going on right now. Well, yesterday you heard that the governor has appointed the 250th commission for the state of South Carolina, the 250th of the American Revolution. And you'll say, well, that's still a ways off. No, it's not. On March 5th of this next year is the 250th of the Boston Massacre. Not that we care about what happens up there. And our own illustrious Charles Baxley, co-founder of the Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution, who mentors so many of us, has been appointed chairman. But wait, the reason is it actually fits him really well, because the object is to wake up our state, our nation, and the world to what the Southern Campaigns have done, which fits perfectly with Charles's disease, PAD, Project Aggrandizement Disorder. But in fact, he can't do it alone. We all need to do it like Rick just proved a few minutes ago. So pay attention. On Tuesday, the governor is going to announce the 250th over in Columbia, and it'll make news. But you need to, the question always is the why on the back of liberty. The why is, what are you going to do for the 250th? Whether it's buy a book, whether it's put in money, whether it's help paint a mural, or help save a battlefield. The question is, what are we, you and I, going to do? Then the other two entities are, that you heard from Doug yesterday, Doug Boston, is the South Carolina Battleground Trust. We have partnered with the American Battlefield Trust. In fact, it took me 20 years ago to get the Civil War Trust to change its name to the American Battlefield Trust. Not because there's anything wrong with that other war, but we wanted to talk about the first Civil War. So we are partners. But folks, just like the Swamp Box Murals Trail, our beautiful host cannot do it alone. So we have to step up. So the Battleground Trust gets a partner to help save battlefields, but it doesn't pay for gas, it doesn't pay for the maps you see, it doesn't pay for the trails or the talks that we're putting together. And that's the third thing. It's called the Liberty Trail. Before the next 10 years, we will change the face of South Carolina, because we will do to South Carolina what the Shenandoah Valley has done to the Civil War. If you go down there, it's nothing but markers and battlefields of the Civil War, where we're going to wake up the state and the nation to the greatest unsung economic development engine that exists. It isn't just for history nuts like us. These battlefields will be recreational facilities. People will walk their dogs, take hikes, they will run and jog on these battlefields. And more interestingly, it'll be green open space, natural resources, where we will once again put together a percentage, which right now is less than 1% of the longleaf pine forest that existed in all the southern states. And we are doing it. For example, at the Battle of Camden, 800 acres we now own is 1/4 the size of the battlefield of Antietam. So we're changing what it'll look like. So remember, it's history, natural resources, and recreational use. So at this point, we wanted to get...
Let me just introduce Leon Harris. You haven't heard from Steve Smith. And I think Charles Baxley is well known. Where is he? Right here. That should do it.
So what we'd like to do is have you ask questions. So if anybody...
Brian Lamite, we can come to you a little bit, but not much. You're going to have to come up and speak.
This is a great opportunity, guys. Come up.
My limited reading of the American Revolutionary War indicates that the Maryland and Delaware Continental units seem to be pop up almost everywhere, and of course included in the Southern Campaign. What I haven't read though is which units, etc., got captured at Camden and then got rescued by Marion's brigade. Somebody here, I think, would probably know the answer to that one.
The good majority of it, Marion would go after a couple days later. It was a conglomeration of Marylanders and Delawares. They were being herded down. Again, it was in the column. Very few guards were on them. Marion found the right opportunity to ambush them. But for the most part, they were a combination of both. The brigade itself was intermingled. So total numbers, I've never seen the return saying X number of men came from a Maryland regiment, X number of men came from the Delaware. All that I've seen from Marion stated was he was able to intercept a prisoner column coming from the Camden and recover them. The problem was a lot of those guys, once they were freed, said, bye. Because by the time he said he only had 2 left. By the time he rescued him, got him back down to Georgetown, 2 remained with the column, and everybody else said, you know what, this war, that hurt, and they tried to get back on it.
Next question.
Was John Eager Howard part of that got captured?
I will add one thing, that one of the 3 Continentals that stayed with Francis Marion, one of them was Sergeant McDonald of the 300-yard shot fame.
I think, fortunately, John Eager Howard, Otto Holland Williams, and a cadre escaped through swamps off to the American right and reconstituted. They got back to Charlotte after 3 days and were able to reconstitute a small force. But they did not get captured. Williams, Howard, and the core really of the 1st Maryland Regiment.
Fair game, folks. Fire away. We dare you. Anything. I'll even start out. A lot of people ask me about this thing around my neck. That always seems to be a nice icebreaker. Nothing. Yeah, we've satisfied your curiosity so far.
Just a further comment on the soldiers that were liberated by Marion POWs. 50 of them were so demoralized because of the hard march to Camden and the hard fighting at Camden that they said they had never been treated so well in the last several months as they had been treated by the British, and they insisted upon marching to Charleston to be prisoners of war. If they had known what was in the future, they wouldn't have done that. They did that at the time. And Marion was so discouraged by the attitudes that he said that he could have taken more of the prisoners of war, but their attitudes were such that I think he was afraid to have them in his column.
We had heard a little bit about Captain James. Anything added after that? Anyone add anything to his story? What happened to him? Or did he
You've got to
survive?
speak for the recording too.
Heard a little bio sketch of the involvement of Gavin James in one of the battles earlier this morning. I was wondering if anybody could add anything about what his final disposition was, what happened to him.
I believe he got killed, didn't he?
I don't think
Walked
so.
away? Seems like he did.
There's a ton of stories about Gavin James doing different things, but they're all kind of folklore type of things. So it's kind of hard to say. I had the impression he survived, and George has the impression that he didn't. But that's, I think, as much as can be said.
I think he's resting in the Indian town
He is.
cemetery.
He is.
You probably go get a clue by checking out that gravestone. And by sundown, Carol will probably have visited, find a grave and tell you exactly when he lived and died.
The sharpshooter McDonald died. He did not survive.
Yes, John.
Go fair, John.
Question on Utah Springs. We know Marion led the front line and then fell back and was when the back lines came up. What was he doing the rest of the battle? Because it went on for quite some time. I don't find anything definitive on exactly what he was doing and where.
You got that?
Two sentences, Charles.
Well, the true answer is we don't know. The speculative answer is that as Greene moved forward, he had a ton of prisoners and he had a ton of wounded men. And so I've speculated about what all the horsemen were doing at different stages of that battle and what the militia was doing. And so I suspect that between herding prisoners around and tending to the wounded, which were numerous by the time the militia withdrew, that they had their hands full. I have pretty extensively studied Utah Springs, and I've never seen a document which answers that question specifically.
The other piece I speculated at is, again, with Marion, unfortunately, again, with his men going in, a good majority of them, their uniforms had already started to fall apart. They were in very poor condition. It was noted that they're having moss under their cross straps. Some were naked, some just had shirts. So of course, when they hit the British camp, they needed clothes. So Marion's trying to reorganize his command. He was losing the initiative. The army was slowing down. He needed to do something. So a lot of us speculated he was trying to reform his ranks. But the men were breaking, as disciplined as they were. You see piles of food, you see piles of clothes. You've had no food, no clothes. A soldier is a soldier. A soldier's got to survive. So a lot of our estimation is he was trying to reform his ranks. But it was noted from the British that even though they were naked, they advanced as fine as Frederick the Great's grenadiers, even in their such poor and shabby condition. So they had discipline right up to the camp. And then unfortunately, well, being soldiers, they needed supplies.
And just to tag on to that, what he's saying about they were hungry. There was at least one account where one of the soldiers said that they were tired of eating turtles and frogs. So if you get some bacon, you're all over.
Yeah, I just want to point out, you know, at Camden, the militia broke and ran and determined the battle. But at Utah Springs, and Charles knows this much better than I, under the leadership of people like Marion and Pickens, the militia was just fine. I think it's a real study in military leadership that the militia performs so well in combat under that kind of leadership.
If you haven't noticed, there's a musket and a rifle and a blunderbuss laying out there. You're free to pick any of those up. Please don't mess with a pistol. It's held together with string. But it's combat loss due to an earlier symposium. But the other three you are welcome to handle. You'll notice the weight difference between the musket and the rifle and a lot of other things. But you're asking what the guys were doing. I think Eric can tell us the problems. It's a very simple looking weapon, the musket, but it was not simple to maintain.
We all know how wonderful the humidity is down here in the South. It's a given. And we all know back then the manufacturing of gunpowder was an exact science. So the issue a lot of times also when the men were going into battle is the muskets would foul. You might get one or two good shots off. At that point, you're rolling the dice. Try to keep it maintained. Oil, there was no such thing as oiling. They would use brick powder or anything else to try to scrub it out. But when you have gunpowder, it looks like cornflakes that's going down the barrel, and you're trying to load your pan. Just the humidity alone will cause fouling around the touch hole. So the men are going to have to stop. A lot of times, you see them, they have the pick and pan. Well, a lot of times, it's just a piece of rag. They got to go in there with their thumbs. They got to try to wipe out as much as they can because you can't get the spark inside the barrel. The weapon will not discharge, or you get a flash in the pan, but nothing will come out. But if you have a lot more fouling pieces, and this is why you see examples of muskets that explode, the soldiers are trained to continue to load. They don't think about, you may actually have 2 or 3 charges on top of one another. The fouling in the pan finally breaks loose, one good spark goes in, the musket explodes, and it's up here by their face. So the men will actually stop and try to clean their muskets. They didn't have modern cleaning kits. They're using their cleaning rods. They're using pieces of cloth. That takes, or hot water, but usually they don't have hot water on the march. They're trying to wipe out, so that slows down the advance. All of a sudden, you're losing your volleys. That's why you saw there's never a battle fought in a rainstorm. Very rarely are battles are fought in the snow, other than with Princeton, was because that moisture alone completely hobbles the Army. And we all know, especially that time frame, it was still moist. You're near a river, you're near a swamp, a lot of moisture in the air. A lot of times the men actually have to hold. And of course, then you got to dress your ranks. At that point, companies are advancing, you're getting disjointed ranks. The commander has to halt. The men got to cover while the other men are cleaning muskets. Once reorganized, reform your line in advance. It takes time.
Questions? Come on, don't be shy.
Yes, how about the indigo plant? Can you come up and tell us that?
There are 4 up here.
Come up there, yeah. Someone has asked about the green plants that are on stage, and Gus has grown those, and they're relative to what we do.
I'm a newbie myself. I come from Hartsville, South Carolina. I used to be in agriculture before I retired and got to hang out with y'all. But I did bring 4 plants. These are indigo plants, and these would have been the kind that Miss Lucas Pickney brought to Charleston and started an industry. They're not involved in the Revolutionary War because the British were paying the colonists to grow the dye for their textile manufacture. But I did want to see what they look like. I found some seed. I made a donation to the Indigo Society and got some and grew them. And they are a little bit scratchy like okra. They got pubescence on the bottom of the leaf, and they're hard to grow. It's like tobacco. We have to start with a plant, a bed, and transplant it, and then toughen it up, put it in the field. Like tomatoes, if you're going to plant tomatoes from seed. But I wanted to see them. I have not tried to process them yet, and that's a very involved process. And one of the ingredients is prepubescent male urine. but they said it's storm. Wouldn't be within a quarter mile back. But I hope y'all will take these home with you, whoever wants them, and enjoy them.
Indigo question. Come on.
Are they a perennial or are they an annual?
I'm pretty sure they're annual, and they're also tropical, so if you say the word frost, they will turn black. They cannot stand the cold at all.
Pile of stuff ready to burn is.
That is some rice, and that particular shot came about 200 yards from Colonel Cobb's grave on the Kitty River. Campbell Cox is a company called Carolina Gold. It is not a heirloom plant. Apparently they went to India and found a nice aromatic grain that goes good in the muslin bags, which they sell for a premium. But everybody enjoys it, and it's grown in South Carolina, and it's really delicious rice. But I thought I'd bring some of that too. It's just some I gleaned.
Peggy, would you like to tell us about dyeing stuff, preparing this indigo and all like you did with the kids?
Well, it's a little more complicated than I thought it was going to be. Okay.
This is your penalty for not giving your husband a Vietnam gift.
That's a different one. Sorry. I've done indigo dyeing, not processing of the plant to dye. I dyed this little blue bag. You can get all shades from really dark navy up to a light, pretty blue. And if it doesn't work at all, you don't get anything. Be wary of instructions that you see on the internet. One of the ingredients that when I was first learning, they had it at 10 times what it was supposed to be. So my first 2 big efforts didn't work. You also have to be very wary of having oxygen in your water. Most of your faucets have that lovely little thing called an aerator on the tip of the faucet. Take that off. Run your water down the side of a bottle or a pan, whatever you're going to use, because one of your compounds that you add to your dye vat is to remove all that oxygen. You're doing a reduction. It is the name of the reaction. Oh, I'm sorry. And then when you take your cloth out of the dye vat, it comes out very light colored, and then it becomes kind of a bright green, a little like the shade of your blouse, Jean. It comes out like that, and it gradually turns blue because of the oxygen in the air. In chemistry, it's a reduction reaction and then an oxidation reaction. I was a chemist, but I'll tell you, I still had a hard time getting used to using indigo dye. Processing the plant to indigo, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. I haven't tried that yet.
Question for her on indigo? Yep. Go ahead, John.
Just back some comments. Nick Butler in Charleston, who's the Charleston Library historian, has pretty well debunked Eliza Pinckney's story. You know, Charleston, we can make up anything. We won World War II, you know, and it's kind of sad, but he's gone, and you might want to go back and look. He's got some tremendous podcasts, and pretty well it was an embellishment from the Pinckneys, according to him, and other people have to do it. Second thing is they found an old indigo pit at the end of the Charleston Greenway. So they're making a park out there, and they're going through it, and there's an old indigo pit. It still has indigo in the walls. So it might be, again, something else for people to look at.
All right, another question? Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. I'm Doug Doster, out of Utah Springs, SAR, past president, past state president of South Carolina SAR. And I've been enjoying this symposium for several years now. I don't always get over here on time, but I do make it. And by the way, so the Miss Utah Springs, I can't let this moment go by without mentioning that Utah Springs is now considered a annual observance on our national SAR calendar, and should be on the DAR calendar also as a established event starting this coming year. So we're very proud that only 4 in the state that are on this calendar. We just got on that recently. I'm a native of Williamsburg County, town of Hemingway, Indian Town Presbyterian Church, my first church. It's still very dear to my heart. Many years back, Dr. Joseph Stevens, who presented here many times, a former professor of mine at Erskine College, and I dedicated John James, the SAR marker for John James here, our heroes. The DAR beat us to it, they marked it also, but we got our SAR mark on it also. My question was, in that King Street area during the war, the burnings of these churches is a great book. I appreciate it. I found it here. Was the church burnings, was it left up to the officers at that time to basically do what they wanted to do with churches? And how they justify that? Thank you.
I failed to mention yesterday that Continental Marines were involved in the defense of Charleston in 1780. The reason I didn't mention it yesterday is I wanted to do some more research before I put that as part of my presentation. But the Marines served on board the 4 Continental ships that were sent to assist General Benjamin Lincoln in the defense of Charleston. On board the Ranger, the Providence, the Boston, and also the Queen of Heart, placed under the command of Commodore Abraham Whipple. Unfortunately, when Whipple's flotilla or squadron was forced to retreat up the Cooper River, the Marines were detached aboard to serve the land forces, and the Marines, because of their skill at gunnery, were positioned and split up amongst the various bastions and also batteries covering both the Ashley and the Cooper Rivers. But they too would surrender with the rest of Lincoln's army. They would eventually be paroled and return back to Chester, Pennsylvania. And many of them would continue to serve on board other ships that were left in the American Navy.
You know, we get asked all the time, how do you find a battlefield? But 2 gentlemen down here, we do it archivally with the 27,000 pension statements done by Leon Harris. And then you also have to add archaeologically. So here's Steve Smith. Does any questions for our archaeologists at the Institute of Archives and Anthropology?
We need to actually answer a question that was on the board. We haven't answered this question yet.
Anybody want to?
About the burnings. Then we'll proceed.
Bill Seegers, who wrote the book that Doug was asking about, is here. And Bill, I would ask you to answer that question.
It was not the general policy of the British military that they would send orders out to burn churches. That's not the case. The Anglican churches were typically burned because they were storing ammunitions. Those churches were typically brick fortresses, so they could put the ammunition in there, whether it be patriots or loyalists or whoever. They could put their ammunition in there and then destroy that. Now the Presbyterian churches, particularly Indiantown you mentioned, yes, it was kind of left up to the commanding officer. If, in my opinion, if he felt like it would serve a purpose to demoralize the community, yes, some churches were burned due to that. Bannister Tarleton had one burned up in Waxhaw because they were befriending all of the wounded soldiers. They were put in the church to be basically hospitalized. When he found out about that, he promptly removed all the wounded soldiers and set the church on fire. There was a great bit of thought given that it would demoralize the community when the enemy burned their church. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for the British, it basically backfired on them. It rallied more people to support Marion, Thomas Sumter, and the cause of the Southern Campaign. But no, directly to answer your question, that was not a standing order that churches be burned. And to my knowledge, there were none burned with people in them, as the movie The Patriot portrays.
Bill's got a great book back there. Other questions? Yes, sir.
On the subject of indigo dyeing, I wonder if Peggy Pickett would care to offer any information from her experience with indigo dyeing during her reenactment of the Liza Lucas Pinckney, or the other sort of a two-part question or comment. One aspect of, that didn't come out during last night's presentation about Rebecca Mott is the extent